I just want to say I'm so honored to be here with you all once again. I'm excited to see so many new faces and some familiar faces. And I'm eager to get started. We're going to explore the human tendencies like we discussed just a moment ago and how they relate to the Montessori pedagogy. But first, before we dive in, I'd like to share just a few details for those of you who are new that define me as the presenter today and the creator of this presentation. So my name is Heather White. I'm a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and in-home caregiver with right around 15 years of experience in the world of Montessori. Currently, I work as an educational consultant, an instructional guide for adult learners who are working to receive their certification in Montessori studies through the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. And I'm also a blog writer and content creator for a few organizations such as the American Montessori Society, Guide and Grow, and also Miru's Toys. I hold certifications from the American Montessori Society for the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 age groups, a master's in education with a concentration in Montessori studies, and an education specialist degree in school psychology. I'm also a nationally certified school psychologist. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. During our time together today, we're going to cover a range of topics, starting with identifying what human tendencies are. We'll discuss the importance of understanding these human tendencies, and we'll really take a close look at the 10 cardinal human tendencies that Dr. Maria Montessori identified that drive us as human beings to really understand and make a difference in our world. We're going to end our discussion with a look at where you can learn more about these universal tendencies if you have an interest. I'd like to take a few moments here just to pause and to ask what you think, based on kind of this introduction that we've had so far, what you think human tendencies might be. How would you define cardinal tendencies that drive us as human beings? Or perhaps what do you think might be some of these cardinal human tendencies? Go ahead and answer in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and answer the question as well, that would be wonderful. Just to give us a little bit of time to contemplate perhaps what we think or what we know about this topic before we start to explore it together. So any thoughts on that? Just want to make sure I give everybody a chance in case anybody's typing into chat. Yes, I see a raised hand. I think it's Roan.
Good morning. So when I think of human tendencies, what drives us, what drives our human tendencies, I think about our need to be independent, our need to explore and discover, and also our need to understand how things work. That's what comes to mind. So basically what drives us is our need to know things, our need to be able to do things on our own, hence developing our independence, our curiosity, our need to discover and explore. Thank you.
Thank you. I could not have said it any better. And I think you will be delighted to see that many of those things that you just mentioned, we will cover, that Dr. Montessori identified as well. I see here in the chat, habits people develop over a period of time to do what they need to do. Yes, I see another hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for having me. For me, I think human tendency, it could be treating people differently. Like I have my way of living, and someone else have the way of seeing the things. So for me, could be treats a person different to the way that, not treating a person the way you want to be treated, but treat a person differently. You see the way that I think there is.
Right, like recognizing that we're all unique as human beings. We all have unique needs, and respecting that and responding accordingly. Absolutely, yes, I think that's a great point. I see. Thank you. human needs, human motivations. Absolutely. Having respect for others. Yeah, I think that connects to what we were just talking about. The desire to be independent, 100%. Feel free to go ahead and keep adding to chat as we move forward if something else comes to mind. But let's go ahead now and take a look at how Dr. Montessori herself identified and defined these tendencies. So Maria Montessori recognized that there were 10 cardinal tendencies that drive us as human beings to understand and make a difference in our world. These are basic human modes of living and being. They're laws, universal laws that govern how we perceive the world. They determine our actions and our behaviors in order to kind of aid in our adaptation so that we can continue living and growing and making a difference in our world. As far as we know, and as far as Dr. Montessori described, these universal human tendencies span throughout our lifetime and are inherent in every single person, despite where they live in time and space. They're part of the shared human inheritance that we all experience and that we all have in common with one another, despite our race, the country within which we live, our culture, or even our time of existence. So Dr. Montessori said that the child is born with this potential to express all of these human tendencies, but they're going to manifest differently depending on those sensitive periods that we talked about and that plane of development within that they're within at that time. So we all have them within us, but it might look different, like we were saying earlier, depending upon what our sensitive periods are, what things we really have this heightened ability to understand or to master and explore, and where we are within our development. So then why are human tendencies important? Since they aid in our adaptation, we really need to make sure as the adult that children are able to express these tendencies freely by understanding and observing these cardinal human tendencies in conjunction with understanding and observing the sensitive periods and the planes of development. We can really start to understand and learn if the environment we're providing for a child, the activities we're presenting to them, and the limits that we've established, if they're really working to the child's benefit or perhaps to their detriment. A human tendency that isn't able to be freely expressed in a developmentally appropriate way can really start to appear as an obstacle for the child's development. And we need to be able to recognize that so that we can remove the obstacle so that they can continue learning and growing. Understanding these human tendencies will allow us to create the conditions that will foster that continued learning and growing, allowing the child to continue to thrive and develop normally. So I wanted to pause again for just a few moments. So now we've discussed what human tendencies are, right? We've come up with a definition. And there were a couple examples already. We talked about the need for independence. I saw in the chat here just a moment ago, the need to be loved. We talked about having respect for others, recognizing that everyone is different, and honoring that and adjusting the way we respond accordingly. Any other thoughts on what one of these cardinal tendencies that Dr. Montessori developed might be? Anything else? She identified quite a few. So are there any other things that come to mind that you think might be one of these cardinal tendencies? We did cover quite a few. So I'll give you just a moment to pause. And if you don't want to add into the chat or raise your hand, feel free to just kind of reflect on this internally. And again, if something bubbles up for you as we move forward, please feel free to add it into chat and we will check back there. But let's go ahead. We've had a lot of great ideas shared. So let's go ahead and take a look at the cardinal tendencies Dr. Montessori identified. And if you have other ideas as we move forward, please feel free to share them in the chat with us. So exploration is the very first step of adaptation. It's the first human tendency that Dr. Montessori described. And I believe Roan mentioned this, right? The need to explore our surroundings. It's this drive to come out, to meet and learn about our environment. As human beings, we're naturally curious and we love to use our senses to learn more about the world around us. If we obey this tendency, it provides us with a general sense of security. It allows children to understand how their environment can and will fulfill their needs. So it brings this sense of safety, this sense of understanding that their needs will be met. I see here in the chat, learning vicariously by imitating models. Yes. The desire to be connected with others or with the environment, the need to find ourselves in order to do that. Observation. Yeah, we've talked a lot if you were here and joining us in the sensitive periods chat or when we discuss the planes of development, how important observation is. So let's see if Dr. Montessori identifies that as a human tendency as well. So the next step after exploration is orientation. And that's the process of making sense of that knowledge that we've acquired. We can establish points of reference and really find our own place within the environment. As human beings, we want to understand our place in the world. We like to establish these points of reference so that we can observe the environment and learn where we fit in. From finding, children like to find their country or their continent on a map, learning their address, all of these things that really help them understand where they fit in. That can be amongst peers as well. If you think about that plane of development, when we talked about adolescence, right? Like understanding where my place in the world is. What do I want to do as a job? How do I get along with other people when they're in that elementary and adolescent phase of development? Roan, I think I saw that you'd raised your hand. Did you want to add something?
I kind of typed it in the chat, but I was thinking the need to understand who you are, knowing why you are here, what is your purpose, your history, where did you come from, your forefathers, who are they, what is my purpose on this earth? And so I believe one of the driving forces would be the need to know all those things about yourself. Who am I? What am I here for? What is my purpose? What is my calling?
Yeah, I think that's a great, I can see how there's a little bit of overlap and connection to this human tendency towards orientation, right? Making sense of a place of reference, finding our place, where do I fit in? But I also think there's a little bit of a deeper human tendency you're describing there, right? Like that connection of who am I? Where did I come from? Who came before me? Who preceded me? And how do I connect to them? More about your heritage. So let's see if there's another human tendency that comes up that connects to that as well. Order is the next human tendency that Dr. Montessori identified. And this is absolutely crucial to our ability to categorize, to organize our experiences and knowledge in meaningful ways. It really helps us bring an understanding to what we are seeing around us. It gives us this deeper understanding that lets us predict what comes next. And again, in doing so, provides us with this sense of security, this sense of safety that we know what to expect. This tendency for order guides us to seek patterns around us, to organize things or categorize them, maybe by color or by shape or by size, and also to form predictions. It brings this deep satisfaction if the world acts in ways that we expect it to, if the world acts according to this order that we've created and established by watching how things respond. And a prepared environment is one of the aspects of the Montessori pedagogy that really allows us to meet this human tendency, because it allows us to create this external order that helps a child develop this internal order. The phrase that's often used is everything has a place and in its place, as well as order and environment and order and mind. So this external prepared environment where order is established, you can see in this photo here, everything is neat and tidy. Everything is inviting and visually appealing. It has a place, it's in its place, and that allows the child to create this order internally as well. The next human tendency is this universal drive that humans have to connect with others. Someone brought that up earlier, right? This need to share our thoughts, our emotions, and our experiences with other people. Communication facilitates an understanding between us as human beings from one generation to the next through written language, spoken language, touch, facial expressions, gestures, even through art, music, and dance. These different art forms are ways that we can communicate with one another as well. So regardless of the pathway that we use, there's this deep-seated need as human beings to connect with one another and to share our world and our experiences with others. All human beings also have a need to carry out work. That's what allows us to remain happy, to create this feeling of satisfaction. It promotes feelings of accomplishment and self-respect. The engagement in productive, goal-oriented tasks looks very different in childhood than it does in adulthood. As adults, we often work primarily for survival, but the aim for the child is to learn, to develop, and to build the adults that he will become, as Dr. Montessori says. Within this tendency, the child will start to manipulate their environment and will demonstrate this repetition. I know when we talked about sensitive periods, if you were here, we talked about how it can be a little confusing, sometimes maybe even frustrating as adults when a child wants you to read a book over and over and over again, or they sing a song over and over and over again. For the child who maybe is learning how to pull themselves up to a standing position, they might repeat this activity so much that they even refuse to take a nap that day because there's this drive internally that's just kind of a compulsion almost, leading them to repeat this activity. So it's this repetition that will allow the child to reveal this sense of exactness and this self-perfection that they're seeking so that they can gain that sense of accomplishment and self-respect. Dr. Montessori believes that work really allowed a child to construct their true self. She said it was free of defect or misbehavior, but it was this work that really allowed a child to explore who they were and what was important to them. The next human tendency is this ability to think mathematically that is intrinsic within all peoples and all cultures. Even those who may have never used symbolic numbers before or have even developed a skill for counting. We refer to the mathematical mind in Montessori as the ability to judge and to compare different things, whether that's distances, speed, elapsed time, available space, and things as mundane as crossing the street or filling up a glass of water. That ability to judge and to be able to discriminate, do I have enough time to cross the street before a car comes? How much water do I need to pour in? When do I need to stop before the glass is full and it might run over? The ability to use this mathematical mind really relies on existing knowledge. How fast does a car move? What is the flow rate of the tap, right? When the water is coming out, we need to understand that, because if the tap is opened to a greater degree, the cup is going to fill up more quickly. In the first plane of development, that period of 0 to 6 years especially, a lot of work is done by the child to observe and to acquire knowledge about the world around them so that they have this existing knowledge base that allows them to make these judgments and comparisons and discrimination that go along with the mathematical mind. Yeah, Roan, go ahead.
Yes, Miss, a question. In explaining the tendencies, the human tendencies, did Dr. Montessori make mention of children who have special needs?
Mm.
Does she explore the difficulties in acquiring those tendencies?
Great question. I know we talked a little bit about this, I think, with the sensitive periods, maybe also with the planes of development. So Dr. Montessori actually started out her work initially in a children's hospital. In that time, they were referred to as handicapped children, or even the term was used as mental retardation. But she worked with children who had some intellectual incapacities, and then went on to work in a housing facility with children from economically disadvantaged populations. And so all of her research and what she kind of described is that these things happened, human tendencies in particular, these things were intrinsic and took place regardless of those internal or external situations, as long as we did what was necessary as the adult to prepare the environment. So if we're thinking in today's day and age, right? If as long as we are able as the adults to remove those obstacles, right? So we're going to observe to see where obstacles might exist. So if we're thinking about the mathematical mind, what kind of obstacles might be taking place that's preventing the child from experiencing this mathematical mind, or judging these distinctions, making these comparisons? What is something that might be interfering and preventing them from doing that? If we go back to that order, right? Our role as the adult is to see where things are disordered in the environment that might be preventing the child from tapping into this human tendency for internal order. So she didn't say explicitly, but the idea is there. Since she worked with these varying populations, she was saying that these things would take place regardless of all of those factors, as long as the environment was prepared in a way that allowed the child to explore these human tendencies. So again, that's kind of where we come in as what Dr. Montessori described as the prepared adults, to make sure that we are removing those obstacles so the child can follow these internal intrinsic drives towards these human tendencies. The next step here, the next human tendency, is towards abstraction. This is the third step that Dr. Montessori identified in the learning process specifically. First, she said you acquire the knowledge of an item, then you link it to others and categorize it based on various aspects. And then finally, children are able to abstract a concept and are able to recall it or consider it without making a connection to the concrete. It allows us as human beings to generalize and to make predictions. And in regards to its development, it's crucial that the child has sufficient experiences in the environment, facilitated by those human tendencies of exploration, orientation, and order. So basically what she was saying, and again, this kind of connects back to what we were just discussing with Roan, is as the prepared adult, we need to make sure that the child has been able to explore, that they've had order in the environment so that they've developed order in mind, and that they've been able to categorize things and exploring them based on shape and size and color, because all three of those things are what's going to lay the foundation to allow the child to move towards abstraction. Here in these photos are some Montessori materials that are often found in the classroom that are concrete, because it allows the child to explore, to orient themselves, and it creates this sense of order. That way they're able to understand the abstract concept. So this first picture here with the number tiles scattered around is called the 100 board. So the child is organizing these tiles in rows of 10 in chronological order, 1, 2, 3, 4. By doing so and filling up this whole board, they're able to learn how to count by twos. They're able to see patterns in numbers. They're able to count by tens, to count by fives. The next material here is called the trinomial cube. And here on the right-hand side is the binomial cube. And this is more, it's a sensorial material that she developed that really for the youngest child is just about seeing patterns and matching colors. It's almost like a puzzle, getting all of these pieces back into the box in the way that they were intended to fit. It can be very tricky even for adults, because if each piece is not in the right spot, they will not fit, the box will not close. But it actually, the pieces have a concrete meaning and representation for how binomials and trinomials work in algebra. So it's laying that concrete foundation. It's letting the child explore and develop this orientation, categorizing these pieces and creating this sense of order so that they can develop this abstract knowledge at a later time. Again, same idea. These are fraction tiles here that allows the child to manipulate and explore and categorize with concrete materials to understand a very abstract concept of fraction. I did see in the chat a request to record the conference. The workshop is being recorded, and it will be available to you all. I'm sure Dr. Lambert can share more information about where that can be found towards the end of the session here. But there will be a copy or a recording accessible to you after the session as well. So the next human tendency is imagination. Imagination is the ability to create, to form, and to modify concepts within our minds without a link to the concrete. So that's how it's a little different than abstraction. While its importance and its uses are widely acknowledged, it's really vital to consider that imagination doesn't develop in the child under 3 years of age. As with abstraction, it's this further step of cognitive development, and it really requires a solid grounding in the environment in order to develop into a positive and productive trait. It's this human tendency of imagination that sets us apart as human beings from other animals. We have the ability to harness, to imagine something, and to really take these creative steps that are necessary to bring something within our imagination, within our minds, into reality, to bring a scenario to life. I wanted to kind of go back for just a moment and touch on, before we move on to the next human tendency, to touch on what I was just saying about how imagination needs to be grounded in the environment and grounded in reality. So there's so much that is offered to children that's in this imaginative realm, right? We have TV shows, we have books, we have stories that we tell them that have these fictional characters, these situations that can't happen in real life, whether we're looking at people flying or dragons, unicorns, fairies, right? And all these things that we think children absolutely love, and no doubt they do. But what Dr. Montessori was saying is that under the age of 6, and particularly 3 and under, that children really aren't able to distinguish reality from fantasy. And so it's more about letting the child at these ages use their imagination in ways that they lead and that they guide. And then we can introduce this fantasy world after the age of 6, when they're able to distinguish reality from fantasy. And really what you'll see the imagination bringing to light under 6, then, if we allow the child to lead, is that they're reenacting, going back to what someone was saying earlier, they're mimicking what other people are doing. So they might pretend they're a doctor, they might pretend that they're a firefighter, they might pretend that they're a chef, or a mom or a dad, even taking care of a baby doll. They're going to replicate things that they're seeing in their life. That's still imagination, but it's grounded in reality. It's grounded in these experiences that they're having in their environment, which then allows them to expand that further into this abstract world once they're ready developmentally. The next human tendency is known as group behavior. Group behavior is this manifestation of a really basic mammalian characteristic. It's this need to be with other people who are like us. It drives us to create and to participate in a social life and in our larger culture. It leads us to the formation and acceptance of rules, laws, and other socially appropriate behaviors. And it, in early childhood, can be manifested by this strong urge, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, this strong urge to imitate, learning how and what we should do, how and what is accepted, by looking at how people around us, those who are in our environment, in our culture, in our homes, how they behave, how they act, and then mimicking those things. The next human tendency is called spirituality. Our spiritual tendency is this uniquely human drive to make our lives richer and fuller, even when our physical and emotional needs have been met and when we are comfortable doing so. It's manifested through things like art, music, dance, religion, and these manifestations, this need is universal to every culture and every community on earth. Obviously, these expressions, these manifestations will be different based on culture and community. But the human tendency that we all share is towards this need for spirituality. In fact, there's a Montessori material that Dr. Montessori developed that's used in the elementary classroom called The Fundamental Needs of Human. And she identified the two categories as physical needs and spiritual needs. And so she really identified and even encourages children to identify that there are these two different things that we really need to thrive as human beings. We need things like shelter, clothing, food, water. Those are our physical needs, but we also need things spiritually to fulfill ourselves as well. So now what? We've talked about all of these cardinal human tendencies that Dr. Montessori identified, but what do we do with that information? The next step really is to observe how these things are being manifested in the children that we live with, that we work with. You can even look for these things in the adults that you live and work with as well. These observations are going to let us know if the environment, the lessons we're presenting, the limits that we've set, if all of these things are supporting the development of these human tendencies, or if they're hindering these things from being actualized. And it will allow us as the adults to start to become more prepared and more capable so that we are able to set the child or even other adults up for success, to really make sure that these internal and intrinsic human tendencies or needs are identified and are actualized. If you are interested in learning more about the human tendencies, there are a couple resources listed here for you. The first is called The Human Tendencies and Montessori Education. It was written by Dr. Maria Montessori's son, Mario Montessori, and it's a small volume where he summarizes all of his mother's beliefs and her research regarding these human tendencies and other things that connect to them. So it's kind of like a collection of all of the information that she stated or shared over the years in her practice, and kind of gathers them all together and summarizes them. If you're looking specifically at the child who's 9 to 12 years old, there's a really wonderful book called Supporting the Upper Elementary's Child's Growth with Montessori's Human Tendencies at Home and at School. And this is by Sonia Foskey-Smith. There's also a lot of other great information electronically. Unfortunately, as far as books or texts from Dr. Montessori herself come, it's kind of scattered throughout a lot of her writings, but the book by her son, Mario Montessori, is really the only concise, summarized example of all of the information about human tendencies located in one place. But if you just do an online search, you really can find a lot of really great information. There are videos, blogs about the human tendencies, what they mean, how we can make sure children are actualizing these human tendencies, what our work as the prepared adult is to allow that process to happen. Two specific examples of this that I would recommend. There is a website called Mainly Montessori, and I'll put this in the chat for anyone who might be interested here. The first is Mainly Montessori, and it is developed by a Montessorian named Pilar Bewley. We've talked a little bit about her in previous sessions. She has a Montessori homeschooling group that she leads and a curriculum she's developed, but she has quite a lot of information, videos and articles to learn more about human tendencies and other Montessori concepts. And then also the website montessoriparenting.org also has a lot of great information about human tendencies. And if you are interested in learning more about Montessori, about human tendencies, Montessori Parenting is actually hosting a free workshop next week. It starts on May 10th from Montessorians from all over the globe on topics related to human tendencies, to sensitive periods, the prepared adult, the prepared environment. So that's a really great way and a free way as well to learn more about Montessori and to really dive deeply and hear voices of Montessorians across the globe. I have a link to that as well. I'll find that in just a moment and share it in the chat with you all as well if you're interested in joining that conference. So with that, I would just like to say thank you so much for joining me today. And in just a moment, I'll open it up. I tried to leave a bit more time for questions today because I know in the past we've had quite a few. Here on the page, I'll leave up for a little while as we chat is my contact information. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Maybe you want to set up a follow-up consultation or a chat with me. My LinkedIn is also there if you want to connect. And I'd also love for you all to check out my new website as well as my social media accounts. They can be found using the handle @montessori.matters. You can see my logo there at the bottom. And these resources are places where I share a lot of content about Montessori, other education and parenting related resources and content that you all might find helpful and inspirational. So I would love if you all followed me and joined me on those platforms as well. So Dr. Lambert, unless you have something you'd like to add, I'd love to open the floor up now for any questions.
Let's open up the floor, Heather White. Questions, comments? We have one coming in from Steve Calpe. Go ahead and unmute your microphone.
I had a great presentation.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for being here.
So my question is, what is the difference between the Montessori style of education and the other style, the private style?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about a more traditional education, a Montessori approach really empowers the children, respects the child as individuals, respects them as human beings, provides more independence and more freedom. Dr. Montessori talked about freedom within limits. So in a Montessori classroom, the child chooses what work they'd like to do, when they would like to do it, where they would like to sit. Do they want to sit at a rug or at a table? And it's really, really important that this environment is prepared. If we think about that picture that was shown, I'll see if I can go back here to give you a closer look. You can see that all of these materials we've looked at, these are Montessori math materials as well, but they're all available in the classroom on the shelf. So the classroom has all of these shelves set up where everything that the child needs is accessible to them. So when they come into the classroom, they're choosing the material from the shelf and they're able to take it to a workspace and engage with that material for as short a period or as long a period as they would like. It's based on the idea that children instinctively know what their minds and their bodies need to learn and grow. So really what we've done when we talked a little bit in our first presentation about what Montessori is, which that video should be available to you all as well. there's this triangle that Dr. Montessori talked about, the Montessori triad, and it's the child, the prepared environment, and the prepared adult. So the idea is that as the adult, we prepare the environment in a way that allows the child to independently access everything that they will need to learn and grow. And our role then is to just step back and to observe and to see where obstacles might present themselves. Just like we are looking for obstacles for these human tendencies, we could look for obstacles where a child maybe is having a challenge with the material, or maybe they're not pulling something off the shelf. And it's our job then to try to be scientists. Dr. Montessori talked about the need to be a scientist as an educator, and to figure out what's going on and how we can guide them or support them along the way. So it's this really hands-on way to learn that supports the child's independence and respects them as a human being.
Where I am in the Virgin Islands, what they use, they have like the grade 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Mhm.
They have them together,
Mm.
mingling with each other.
Mhm.
And I was thinking if that's a good style of educating child.
Yeah, so Dr. Montessori, when we spoke last week about the planes of development, she identified the planes of development as 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 15. And so in looking at that period of 6 to 12, she really encouraged creating multi-age classrooms based on those planes of development, because the children were all experiencing similar things and could learn and grow from one another. So in Montessori schools, typically, not always, but typically, you see first, second, and third grade together, and then you see fourth, fifth, and sixth grade together, and then you see seventh, eighth, and ninth grade together, and then 10th, 11th, and 12th. And the idea there, and sometimes they're combined, sometimes it might be 1st through 6th and then 7th through 12th, because they're in those same planes of development. But multi-age classrooms in general are shown to have tremendous benefits for learning and for growth, because some children are able to step into a leadership role and set the example for others. Younger children look up to those older children and often are able to learn concepts and to master skills before they would be able to do so normally, because they're seeing this example from an older classmate. And I'm sure we all know that the highest form of learning is being able to teach someone else a concept. So you can empower those older students then to be able to teach things to their younger classmates, and then you will have the understanding as the educator that real learning has taken place, because they're able to teach something that's been taught to them.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Let's see, I see Frank has a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Frank.
Yes. Can you come again on exploration?
Yeah.
On exploration, I didn't get it right. So I just want to be clear on what it is.
Yeah, let's go ahead and.
What did you say?
Yep, let's go ahead and go back and we will revisit that topic.
Mm-hmm.
Put the slide back up so that we can see it here. It was one of the original topics that we explored, one of the original human tendencies. Here we go. So it is this need to discover things in the environment, Dr. Montessori described it as meeting the environment. Just like you think about meeting another human being, it's about entering the environment and really discovering what it is. So whether that's a bedroom in the home, a classroom space, but just this natural instinctive curiosity to learn about one's surroundings, typically, and most importantly, using your senses. So that's why there's so many didactic materials in a Montessori classroom, because Dr. Montessori felt like the best way that we learn about things is through our senses. So there are these beautiful colors for the child to see. small details that they can investigate visually, things for them to touch, for them to hear, for them to smell. So all of these things allow the child to explore or to investigate their environment. Again, whether that's the classroom, it could be a backyard, a bedroom. And by doing so, it gives children, or us even as adults, this sense of security. If you think about when you enter a new environment, whether it's a new workplace, maybe you buy a new home, move to a new community, all of those things to learn about our surroundings, to explore what's around us, to investigate. And once we do, it fills us with this sense of belonging, of security, because we know what our environment is and we know how it's going to meet our needs, or how we might need to shift something to allow the environment to meet our needs. And that's what it does for children. Let's see, Roan has a question, I believe, as well.
I have two questions.
Absolutely.
Yes, so the first question has to do with the human tendencies. So when it comes to the mathematical tendencies, does a child who has dyscalculia, does that child have the same mathematical tendencies as others? That's my first question. Do you want to answer first, or should I move on to the next one?
You can go ahead and say the next one.
Right. And the next question is the Montessori approach to teaching and learning based on the constructivist approach, or is it the reverse? Is it the constructivist approach based on the Montessori approach? And I think the third question is, does the Montessori approach encompass universal design for learning?
Great questions. Okay, so I'm gonna start with your last two. So yes, Montessori does allow space for and align with the universal design for learning. There's a lot of research based on that online that you can look into. And Montessori is a constructivist approach to learning because it's based on that idea that the child creates their own education through their interactions with the world. So you have constructivist approach, and Montessori is one of those constructivist approach. Another is the Reggio Emilia approach to learning, or style of learning. Going back to your first question, I love that you have these questions about neurodivergent children. I think I shared with you in a previous conversation that as a school psychologist, those students and those topics are so close to my heart, and something that's really important to me, that overlap between school psychology and Montessori. I think it is something that is so powerful, and an area that we have so much more to learn and grow with. So I think that, yes, a child with this dyscalculia, will go back to the mathematical mind slide, they would still have this intrinsic ability to judge and to compare things, but they have this difference within their brain, because the mathematical mind is this instinct, or this internal drive, right? It's not necessarily the way our brain is functioning cognitively. That's where that neurodivergence, that dyscalculia, is going to come into play. So we're really looking at the mathematical mind as this instinctual drive to want to judge and compare. But now we have this neurodivergence, this dyscalculia, that's impacting that instinctual drive, that's impacting that desire to judge and to compare. And that then becomes that obstacle that we have to identify as the adults to start to make some changes, or to provide some additional support and resources for the child to remove that obstacle. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss, I saw a few comments in the chat, make sure I didn't miss anything here. I see. Don't think so. I did see someone ask for my email address. I'll put it here in the chat. It is on that last slide. And I also wanted to share, I did pop into the chat the web address for that Childhood Potential Conference offered by Montessori Parenting. If you're interested in learning more about Montessori or about the human tendencies, I'm sure there's a presentation on that. It's a 3 or 4 day conference this year. There's live presenters, lots of recordings that you can watch at your own speed and at your own time to learn a lot more about the philosophy and the pedagogy. I did want to say, Steve, as well, something that you might want to take a look at. I can try to find the specific article, but I will give you the general kind of link here to the page, and then you can also investigate. But the American Montessori Society that I write blogs for as well, I recently wrote a blog and did a lot of research on multi-age classrooms and the kind of studies that show the importance and what those values are. That might be something you want to take a look at. So that the amshq.org /blog is the blog website, and you can find it there. You can search by keyword as well for multi-age or mixed age, and it will come up. I think that might be something that's helpful for you as well to kind of see those benefits of a multi-age classroom. Emmanuel, go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right, thank you for the presentation. That's been really, really insightful. Yeah, so I think I heard you some time ago, you did mention that it's good for a child to be able to distinguish between reality and fiction before they are exposed to some of those fictional aspects of learning. So for example, if a child is exposed to a fictional world where imaginative acts are materialized as reality, for example, maybe the cartoons where an artwork, maybe a cartoon figure just draw an art like maybe an apple on the wall and take the apple and start eating it as if it's reality. So how does that affect that child who is not able to distinguish between reality and acts at maybe that age?
Yeah, so you know, Dr. Montessori didn't necessarily talk a lot about the detriment. She just recommended that it was hard for them to distinguish the difference, because to them, there's so, and I think really what she was getting at is there's not necessarily a need to introduce the fantasy. A lot of times we introduce fantasy concepts, even for us as adults, because we're looking for an escape from reality. We want something more exciting and more engaging. And for very young children, especially that age 0 to 6 that she was talking about, she was saying that the world, their real world, whether that's in the home and the outdoors in their classroom, everything is so new and so awe-inspiring to them that we don't need to introduce fantasy, because they're so encapsulated and so have this sense of wonder about the things that exist in the real world. But to speak to your point, and again, Dr. Montessori didn't say a lot about this. There's been a lot of kind of discussion and research since then, especially more in present day when things like cartoons and screen time and all of that have become more predominant. I think that's when we see children start to mimic things that perhaps we prefer them not to. Going back to the idea, like that's one of the human tendencies we talked about, right? Is the imitating the things that we see in the world around us. So when we introduce cartoons, movies, we are inviting children to start to imitate some of the things that they see there. And so I know I moderate in a Facebook group for parents of children 0 to 3 who are implementing Montessori in the home. And they'll sometimes say like, oh, my child saw, you know, a cartoon character hitting someone and now they're hitting someone. Or they were spitting and now they're spitting. So they really, it's not, the child is just doing what's very instinctive to them to mimic and to repeat behaviors that are modeled for them, even if it's through a cartoon or through a screen. So I think that's one piece of it. I think the other piece of it is that we are perhaps, I don't want to say the word robbing. I think that's a bit too harsh, but we are taking away the opportunity for them to use their imagination in a way that's much more natural, that's much more intrinsic. Because like I was saying, if we don't give them these fantasy ideas at a very young age, they're going to engage their imagination, connecting to things that are familiar to them. Being a mom, taking care of a baby, being a dad, a firefighter, someone who delivers the mail, maybe a chef. And so I think we are taking those experiences and opportunities away from them that, again, going back to the human tendencies, is something that they're driven to do instinctually by using that imagination. The last piece of it that I feel, and I joked about this even with my own family, because as a very young child, I was absolutely terrified of the Easter Bunny. We had a child's arcade here called Chuck E. Cheese. And there was this very tall person that wore like a mouse or a rat costume. I was absolutely petrified. And I've told my family now, I said, well, think about it. Like, doesn't that make sense for a child who doesn't know what's real and what's not? If you really thought, even as an adult, that there was a 6 foot tall rat approaching you, that's going to be very, very scary. And for a child who doesn't know that that's someone wearing a costume, they think that that's real. I think that introducing these elements of fantasy before a child can really understand that they're not real, also opens the doors for these big feelings and scary moments for a child that then we need to address and to help guide children through that maybe we didn't need to had we not exposed them to these things.
Heather White,
Thank you.
there are many people in education right now using role-playing games, those fantasy role-playing games, to psychologically help a lot of students come out of their shell, learn group behavior, problem solving. Does Montessori use any of that?
Absolutely. So we typically refer to those role-playing things. Dr. Montessori has a whole area of her curriculum called Grace and Courtesy. And it's really about learning it's things like how to say you're sorry, how to hold the door for someone, how to introduce yourself, how to pull out your chair, how to interrupt politely, how to let someone know that you're upset, just these ways that we engage with other people. And so in the age before the age of 6, you're still introducing those role-playing scenarios. Sometimes these grace and courtesies can be an explicit or direct lesson where the teacher is just explaining to the child how to do it. That would be things like holding the door open for someone, pushing in your chair. But when it comes to these experiences and interactions with another person, like how to say you're sorry, how to resolve a conflict, how to introduce yourself, it's often a role-playing situation with more than one adult in the classroom. Or going back to the benefits of those multi-age classrooms, you can ask the older children who've already had those experiences to role play and show that experience and interaction to the younger children, show them what that looks like, role play it for them. And the difference there, I think, in that role play versus what we're talking about fantasy, is that role playing is based in reality. Those are things that are happening in their environment that they're seeing, that exist in the real world in their everyday interactions, as opposed to something that they're not going to see, like a unicorn or a fairy or something like that. So absolutely, role playing is a huge part of grace and courtesy lessons. And also, as the children get a little bit older, Dr. Montessori talked about peace education, which is all about that conflict resolution and interacting with other people in peaceful, cordial ways. Let's see, I see a couple questions here in the chat. how does the drive for order manifest in different cultures and societies, and how is it reflected in their environment? So I'm not sure, Emmanuel, if you were here in the beginning, but Dr. Montessori said that these human tendencies spanned across cultures. So they're the same regardless of where you come from, your race, your gender, your age, whether you were a human being 100 to 400 years ago, or whether you're living in the present moment. So that intrinsic drive for order would be there regardless. It would be an internal need. But as far as reflected in the environment, that's where we as the adults come into play, that we need to make sure that there is order in the environment so that the child is able to express and actualize that human tendency for internal order. Is it okay to allow children to use parents' mobiles to watch YouTube, play games, and watch cartoons? So Jamal, for that, I would say, I think it really depends on the age of the child. And it's really more of an individual family's decision, right? I think it's always important to consider what's best for your family and your child. We can all have these ideas about what we want and what is best. And then we are in the moment where our child is having a huge emotional meltdown about something, and we just need a break for just a moment, and we might give them the phone. So I think it's important to give ourselves grace as well as the adults, and know that there might be situations where we need to rely on those things. And there are a lot of educational games that could be on a phone or on an iPad. There's, in fact, even Montessori materials have been adapted to be present on those devices. So I think there are ways that they can be helpful and can be supportive. The only thing I'll say about that is that it is indicated by medical professionals that exposing very young children to screens, particularly under the age of 3, it's not recommended to introduce screens to little ones at all, just because it is shown to impact their eye development and their brain development as well. I think, Dr. Lambert, it looks like we have one last question here. Do we have time for one more?
That would be fine.
Awesome. All right.
That's Arnulfo Ching.
Yes. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello. Good evening or good afternoon there in the US. I'm from Switzerland.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you also for the wonderful presentation. I just have one question. Maybe you could give me some whatever answer you can give. My question is, to what extent does the Montessori approach foster or inhibit the development of human tendencies in the age, especially in the age of digitalization? And what are the implications of this for education and child development?
Great question. So the Montessori, thank you. The Montessori classroom is really developed to allow all of these human tendencies to become actualized. If we kind of will flip back here and talk about a few, for spirituality, a lot of Montessori classrooms have peace corners. They incorporate things like art and music and dance for children to express themselves. They invite members of the community of various cultures and ethnic backgrounds to come in and speak with the children and present things so that there's this spiritual connection provided to each and every student. Group behavior, obviously, we're creating this classroom culture, this classroom environment where children feel like they belong and they're accepted. Imagination looks a little different based on the ages, but there are opportunities for children to engage, like we were talking about, maybe in these role play situations, or even as the child gets a little bit older in elementary, there's a lot of storytelling. The Montessori cosmic curriculum, looking at things like the study of botany, biology, zoology, geography. We talk about the great lessons, and we come up with these great stories of how things came to be to encourage and foster a child's imagination. Obviously, we talked a little bit about abstraction and how the concrete Montessori materials allow the child to move from the concrete to the abstract. the mathematical mind. Again, all of these are materials that are in the classroom that allows the child, even from a very young age, when they enter the early childhood environment at the age of 2.5 or 3, there an entire area of the classroom called the sensorial area and another practical life where the child can start to practice comparing things and judging how things are the same and how they're different. The entire Montessori classroom is designed to provide children meaningful work, things that are absolutely goal-oriented and productive for them so that they gain this sense of satisfaction and this sense of self-belief. Communication, again, we're fostering those grace and courtesy lessons, the role playing of how children engage with one another. Peace education comes into play there. We're modeling for children how they can relate to each other. And then again, helping them through those situations where they're trying to communicate with others as well and express their opinions, their thoughts, their emotions, acknowledging and validating their emotions and their thoughts back to them, reflecting what we see and what we hear helps in this as well. And then we'll stop here, but basically, you know, we talked a lot about that prepared environment, that's such a big piece of the Montessori classroom, of how we are setting the environment up to have this external sense of order to create this internal sense of order. And as far as kind of the second piece of your question there of you know, how that's relevant to today's time and to technology, most Montessori classrooms, and again, I say most, not all, do not have technology present until the child enters the age of years, so around the age of 6. And even then, it's very limited. It might be a computer to help them engage in research on a topic of interest. It might be an iPad so that they can create a presentation to share something that they've researched with their classmates and create this production. Maybe they're videotaping something for a project, but it really isn't immersing in this technological world. It really is just a tool that's used as a supplement. I believe we've answered all the questions. So again, before I turn it back over to Dr. Lambert, I just want to say thank you all so much for having me once again. As always, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure, and hopefully you all enjoyed this discussion and learned a little bit about the human tendencies and more about the Montessori philosophy and pedagogy.
Yeah, this is a fascinating subject of human tendencies, and it goes much deeper than that because you can really develop these more and more. I mean, in my own work, I developed how to order these things emotionally and how to order these things mentally. But at the same time, there's this process of really understanding how a human being needs to express in a complete sense. So Heather White, thank you so much for bringing this topic. What do you think you'll be talking about the next time you come?
No, I was thinking about that this morning. We've covered quite a bit about these overarching philosophies that Dr. Montessori developed. And we've had questions come up in almost every chat about more of the minutia that happens in the classroom. So I was thinking it might be helpful to kind of dive into some of that, maybe looking at some of the Montessori materials, maybe that prepared environment that came up quite a bit today. Steve gave me another great idea, maybe the multi-age classroom and how that is really beneficial, because I think that spans across multiple pedagogies, right? It's not just in Montessori, it's kind of a basis in Montessori and why it's used and implemented in that realm, but can also be beneficial in other spaces as well.
Ooh, some very good topics. That's a multi-age classrooms. That's really relevant.
It is.
When you look around the world, that's really relevant.
Yeah, it's, you know, Dr. Montessori talked about, and I think it's so, like you're saying, it's so necessary for where we are today. as a world globally, the value is really in that it represents more realistically what our experiences and our interactions look like once we graduate, once we're not in the classroom anymore. Because when we're working or we are out in the real world, so to speak, we're not just with one age group of people. We're with people from all different backgrounds. We're with people of all different ages, all different races, different genders. And so this multi-age classroom really provides a more realistic representation of the world that helps children learn how to engage with other people in meaningful ways.
Well, don't see any more questions. It looks like we're done. Heather White, thank you so much for another great presentation. We look forward to the next one.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. I hope you have a great day or a great night, depending on where you are around the world.